Welcome to the Intellectual Anarchy podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
And I'm Catherine Cruz, and I'm just a curious cat.
The topic of today is the rise of the Techno Warrior, and we call him the Techno Warrior because it's a way of thinking in the technology space, and there's certain features that are there. And the first one to really talk about is the emotional content, and by that I mean where the heart and the head come together. It's a powerful combination. The education and the knowledge is one thing, but the ability to work through the hard problems is where the heart is.
You have to have the passion.
Right. And without that, you're not going to do the hard problems. And there's all kinds of interesting examples of people that have, like, I refer in the book Nikola Tesla, not the car, but the guy who developed these ideas around electricity. Brilliant, tormented, insightful, and way ahead of his time. And that kind of person needs the opportunity to do the things that he needs to do to push the world, right? That kind of person. Now, they're not always easy to manage. So managing these folks is not easy. That's why what Jan does as the COO, the head zookeeper, because she's dealing with all kinds of people. But they come in all of these eclectic forms and shapes. They don't come in one size. Everybody's different. Their brains work a little differently. But one thing, when the emotional content is there and the heart and the head come together, they're willing to take the risk to try something that's really hard. And they're looking for the data, the science to demonstrate the thing that they think is going to happen. And they're going to work on it until they get it right. And that's a focus and a resolve that's required to move the needle of reality. That's what it takes. And so we have people that do that, and they do it regularly. And like this young group of PhDs that I had lunch with today, of a new recruit into Oceanit, it begins the boot camp of learning to do that, learning to connect their heart and their brain, and not just the brain and live in an academic antiseptic world, because the world is not like that. And obviously it can't just be driven by your heart. You've got to manage it. But when those two come together, it's powerful. That's where you push through the edge of science, what's possible, what's thinkable, into the thing that's so different than anybody thought was imaginable.
So you have all the degrees and, the theories behind things, but I guess you have to have the drive and, I guess, permission to push it.
But what's interesting is I tell folks on the mainland that it's also what makes Aloha special. It's not just an idea, it's where the heart and the head come together. People are thinking, but they're feeling at the same time. And those two things create a force. And that's what happens in what we do. So it creates a force that isn't just 1 and 1 is 2, it's 1 and 1 is like 16. It's a force multiplier. Because when the heart and the head come together, you bring a certain amount of energy to it and focus and ability to work through the hard problems to get to the thing that's going to really matter. And that is why we talk about that in the chapter, because people forget that that's part of innovation. It's not just all about, I feel about this, and you've got the discipline and the education, the tools, the knowledge, what's been done before, and all those things. But bringing those together is hard and important, but that's where the magic happens. And so it's hard to prescribe that, but you create the environment where that happens. You encourage people to do that by enabling them to take risk.
Okay, but at what point do you say, all right, I failed at this, and I'm not going to be defined by this? The other day I tried to take apart my dryer and I couldn't fix it. And I just say, okay, I had to give up. I'm like, all right, I can't do it.
So there's two different perspectives on it. One is that you failed. The other is that you learned. And we choose to train people to learn from what didn't work, as opposed to saying, I failed, so I'm done. And if you're constantly learning, you'll iterate into a solution. But if you're not learning, it ain't working. And so when people try something and it doesn't work, there's a lesson. And the question is, what's that lesson? And how do I grow from it? And teaching people how to grow from it is really important.
Okay, like not to spend 3 hours on a dryer.
Well, that may be the lesson, because it's not what you thought it was. So now
Right.
you're smarter the next time.
Right, yeah.
And you can bring in a team to work with you on it, as opposed to you trying to do it all. But you see this kind of thing going on with little kids, right? I've got a couple of grandchildren, so they're learning, and they're taking what didn't work and they're building it into the next version, and taking what didn't work and building the next version, and that's constant. That's what we're trying to get with grown-ups. And it's hard, because by the time they've grown up, a lot of it's been beat out of them.
Right.
And what we do is we try to bring it back, because that's what makes it fun. Kids have fun even though they might bump their head and get banged up, but they're having fun while they're doing it.
Right. They're experimenting and no one's told them, no, you can't do that.
Right.
Or they're just saying, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was just talking to one of the visitors we had yesterday from DC, and I said, some of these younger folks, they don't know what they can't do. So sometimes they just do it, because we don't tell them they can't do it. Now, there's a discipline and there's a focus and that kind of thing, but we're not trying to tell people they can't. We're trying to say, how do you? And a friend of mine, I just saw the email today, he's working on anti-gravity, and he said these experiments that just got done proved that his theory wasn't right. And this guy's brilliant. And we're looking at a few people trying to work with him, because he's probably getting closer, but he doesn't have it sorted out. People have wondered, how does gravity really work in here? Are there gravitons? There's these missing parts of physics. And people are trying to figure out, how do you solve these things? They're just gaps in the theory. Doing that will have a profound impact. It's important there are people trying to do that. They're trying to think about it. And they have to be willing to be wrong in order to be right. So and this guy, again, he's brilliant. I've known him for a while. He's a professor at UH. And, you shouldn't feel bad because it didn't hit. I think it's a very cool idea. There's just something in the theory that's missing. And that is where we should be focusing. How do we change the perspective to work on that problem? Because anti-gravity would be way cool, right? You can have flying cars, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. But we got to get that part right. And so that's where these fundamental physics people come in. And this guy's, we had lunch, and I told him I thought it was an awesome idea, but the fact that he didn't get the data he wanted shouldn't be a reason to stop. It's a reason to pivot. And that's what we try to do here, is teach people how to think like that.
So then how much, I don't know, like risk are you willing to take on something?
Well, that's a really good question, because there's, what might be considered crazy risk. Like, I'm going to jump off a building and see if gravity really works here. In the movie, it turns out it didn't. So we're hoping people don't go that far. But to develop an idea and want to test it is what we want to encourage people to do, and an idea to address something that really is important. Important is a subjective term. There's a ton of things important, like healthcare, climate, all kinds of interesting things. We talked about AI earlier. Artificial intelligence with large language models is a brittle, blunt object that's that's moving AI. It's massively computational. The back end is horrendous. It uses all kinds of energy. Humans are very, very efficient in the use of energy in their form of intelligence. We're trying to do the human style, and that's a hard problem. But see, the human intelligence is very elegant, it's very efficient, and we still don't understand all there is about that, but that's the thing we're focused on. Because that, we think, could be profound. Now, is it also dangerous? Yes. And will we have some failure? Absolutely. But we have had some successes. And so it kind of comes like that. We're going to try something. If we don't quite get it, we may pivot and try something else. We think it's a worthy idea. So to your point, how do we decide on the risk? We try to identify worthy ideas. What's worthy? It's a subjective thing. But worthy in a broad sense is, with our time on the planet, what's worthy of our time and energy to make a difference to the world.
So can you give an example of where, let's say, you were presented with a project or a problem, and you tried to attack something and it didn't work, but then there was a breakthrough?
There's a lot of there's so many examples, but one that is interesting. So during COVID, a friend of mine we were working with, Nobel Prize in Physics, took his team and pivoted to making respirators because the world needed respirators. Here, we were doing this work with DARPA and developing these tools, we call the grammar of RNA, so we can design these molecules. And this is in a research mode. So we're figuring, okay, the world is in a bad way. We have a tool. Let's put our time into something that's going to make a difference. That's how we launched the rapid test. We had never done a test.
COVID test, right.
And we took the tool set, which was not built for the test at all, and said that's a worthy thing, because if we can do that, it'll help people. And as we could do lots of things, like part of the team wanted to make plastic masks and 3D printed stuff. And I said a lot of people can do that. Very few people can do this that we decided on. And I said, we built this tool set, and if it's that good, we should be able to do this. That's what led to the rapid test we developed that you can buy on Amazon, for those of you that are interested, called Assure 100. And we learned a lot of stuff. So for example, we started out doing saliva. Because we thought, well, that makes sense. But then we realized we had a group from the legislature visit the lab downstairs, and we were collecting samples, and I'm watching them produce samples, and I realized some of these people can't spit. And I thought, what a crazy idea. We figured everybody can spit. Turns out not everybody can spit on command. So we started realizing that, okay, we got to rethink this. I mean, we need a sample, and we thought saliva was better than nasal. But it turns out everybody's got a nose. And so we went with the nasal, but we spent all this time on saliva, and we had a lot of good stuff working. But I remember watching these people struggle to spit. And they were a little on the older side. Maybe they had dry mouth, maybe they had whatever. But we just thought, how hard can that be? But then I'm watching these people, I'm thinking, oh, guys, we got to rethink this. Yeah. Because if they can't spit on command, this ain't going to work. So we made a pivot, and we made lots of pivots in that process. But it started out by saying, if this tool is really good, can we design a molecule to bind to part of the COVID virus? We did. And we were able to get very specific on that binding affinity, and that became the test. But the tool set today, now we're trying to reuse the tools, build on the tools for things like a cancer therapy. So we're looking at a whole bunch of different cancers. We're trying to collaborate with University of Hawaii's Cancer Research Center. We're trying to pick a few things, breast cancer, liver cancer, pancreatic cancer, some of these hard ones, because we can design a tool through these molecules we can fabricate based on the AI tool we built and connect a therapy to specifically target a tumor exactly. So instead of carpet bombing somebody with all kinds of chemotherapy, it's a very specific therapy. And where it ultimately could go is we call it field-forward, edge-manufactured medicine. And by that I mean I can have a machine to build it wherever I need it in any city. So I can take, your data, your genetic information and other things, put it in this system. It'll do the analysis and it'll say, well, it'll design a therapy and then it'll synthesize the therapy. All right there. That's where it's going. Now, we're not quite all there yet, but we see all those pieces. That all started with, because, during the COVID pandemic, we were not thinking at all about this. But it turns out the fundamental question of this human-style AI that we started working on with this efficient version rather than large language models produced a really cool tool. We'd never really used it like this, but we thought, all right,
Why not? What's there to
it's
lose?
a worthy problem.
Right, yeah.
Let's do something to make a difference, even though there's a lot of risk. And when I talked to the FDA folks early on, they said, nobody does this in Hawaii. Like, who are you and why are you even there? And I said, because it's home and because we're good at this. So stay tuned.
Okay, so it's not like someone's got to fly thousands of miles to go get treatment from this one particular hospital. You're trying to see if you can.
In the future, that's
Yeah,
how it's going to
yeah.
happen. You can do it right at the hospital, as opposed to even going to pharma the way they do it today. And that's where things are going. A friend of mine, totally separate thing, but has worked on a very cool idea. He's a former DARPA program guy. It's a drug vending machine. You put in a quarter, a couple dollars in, it produces the drug on the fly.
Wow.
And he's got parts of it working. So it's interesting because the first kinds of customers are like clinics in the boonies, military, but it totally disrupts the model of how pharma works because you've got like raw materials it's kind of like the old vending machines. Instead of the soda cans, you had carbonated water and syrup, and it mixed it together in a little cup in front of you. That's what he went back to with the vending machine for drugs. I said, when he was first thinking about it, I said, that's a very cool idea. That's a worthy problem. Because by being able to do that, you can make things much more available when they're needed, as they're needed. You change the entire profile of logistics and availability. You take the model of how things are done today and you turn it on its head. Now, clearly he's going to battle the pharma companies and everybody that doesn't want to see him succeed. But I said, again, back to what's a worthy problem. That's a worthy problem.
So this cohort of PhD folks that you have, I mean, you say, okay, we've got this problem, have at it.
Yeah. There's a method to the madness, but it's a lot more like playing jazz than it is having a real structured system. There's an improv that goes on. And to have a real authentic improv, it's not really scripted. It's kind of in the moment.
Right. Think on your feet.
Right. And we have people that learn to do that. And so to your question, if we've got a really hard problem, we may get people together and it may look a lot more like not a comedy club thing, but it's improv, right? It's like we're looking at this thing, they go to the board and then someone goes over, no, let's try this. And it goes back and forth and it's like, okay, I think there's something there.
Right. You work your other side of the brain.
Right. But that ability to improvise with people and play off of others' ideas is what happens. It's a lot of fun. But see, you got to be comfortable in what you're doing and you need to learn. There's a couple tools. So instead of saying but, you say and. Sounds silly. But if somebody says, yeah, I've got this idea. I think we can make a drone and it looks like a bird. And somebody comes in and doesn't say but this, they say and. The bird it's made of cardboard. And somebody comes in and says and And the cardboard's got a layer of nanomaterials so that it holds up in the weather. And the next guy comes in and says, and so they're building on these ideas, but it's not scripted.
Right. It's a rift.
Exactly. And creating the space where that's okay, and then giving people the license and encouragement to do that. Because people don't want to throw an idea out there for fear of looking stupid. And there's a technique where I can throw out a really stupid idea to create space for better ideas. And so when people are stuck, sometimes something that's outrageous unstucks them. Because if I'm saying something and I take the thing off the table, it's like, it's okay to be stupid. Put it out there. Let's see what we got and see if we can get something. So sometimes you can punch through that, people just looking at each other, by throwing something out that looks even ridiculous. By ridiculous, you may know ahead of time, well, that ain't going to work. But when you put it out there, then it's like, yeah, but okay, we can do this thing, or I can build on this, or let's try this version of it, or something.
Yeah, there's something there.
But you're creating a conversation. But it is in this more unscripted, it's either between jazz and improv, how it happens.
Well, I just think of COVID and how that just disrupted everything, and how we had to navigate our way through so many different layers, the geopolitical stuff and
It's crazy.
And then we're on the other side of it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Early on, it's funny. I was following the data in China, and I remember sketching out of my notebook, I don't know, like on a weekend. And I'm working through the numbers, and I'm going, holy crap, this could be really bad. Because I calculated a few million people, possibly at least 1 million people are going to die in the U.S. And so I talked to Jan and the management team, and I said, I don't see any way around it. This is coming. Even though when I talked to the state, they said, don't worry about it. I literally talked to the mayor at the time, and he said, it's not going to happen. That's not an exaggeration. I think the fire chief was in the meeting from the Honolulu Fire Department. And I said, Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, you're wrong. I said, it's just math. And there's just no way around it. I can't see it. So we had the ER doc who became the director of health, Libby Char, others kind of in this meeting. But I was explaining how it could be managed. And back then, we were thinking of, he said, we know people in World Health Organization, we can get these PCR tests, we can help out. We're just trying to be helpful. But I remember being told it's not going to happen, don't worry about it, and we got it covered. And so I've been reminded a few times about that meeting because it's just math at that point, way before it became a real issue, because it's a political football. The last thing the state wanted to do is say there's going to be this thing, because that shuts down tourism.
Right.
Nobody wanted to hear it. And so that was part of it, but that's a subset of what was going on around the country, because nobody wanted to acknowledge that there was going to be something this devastating coming. And of course, they don't want to unduly spook people. I had done the math a couple times, and I thought, I can't see my way around it.
Well, I was just thinking the other night, reading about the avian bird flu now found in dairy cows.
Right.
When you just stop and gulp, okay, what could that mean,
Right.
down, yeah.
Absolutely. And the disruption of habitat, displacing of other parts of our ecosystem, finds itself expressed in other parts of the world. In this case, it slammed right into the modern world in a way that nobody thought was even possible at the time. But it's going to be a continued risk and problem. It could happen again. Even the COVID could morph into something more dangerous. But we're not done with this.
Right. So you can't let your guard down thinking, okay, yeah, we're done with COVID, but COVID's not done with us, maybe necessarily, or something else will pop up.
And it needs to be part of how we think of what we do in the world, how we do development, this idea like, so what's up with that rainforest anyway? Well, yeah, they actually are important habitats for certain kinds of things. As opposed to dismissing it, I think now we realize that we all share this planet together and we're not escaping it, even if we live on the other side of the planet, because everybody's connected, right? Airplanes go everywhere all the time, every day. That's the world we're in. It's an awesome world. However, you can't just ignore these things and dismiss them. And at that time, I think there was a bunch of that dismissal. And for all kinds of reasons, again, with the state of Hawaii and the city and county of Honolulu, I don't think they wanted to hear that there was going to be something that would potentially disrupt the economic engine. And that's the last thing I wanted to do.
Right. But we learn from it.
Well, yeah. Again, it's just math. Somebody can challenge it, but at the same time, it was going on and it was there in the data. It's just nobody wanted to talk about it. I was talking about it at work because I said, we need to plan for this because this is coming. So what are we going to do to keep the business running, to keep people safe, to kind of keep the trains running, but we can't do it the way we've been doing it. And the team did a fantastic job keeping people safe and keeping all the trains running. That was not a trivial thing. That was a very thoughtful, deliberate, planned exercise, and they did an excellent job of that. But early on, when I kind of walked through it with them, I said, here's what we need to start planning for because we can't stop this. And that turned out to be a really good thing.
So you got tested big time.
Big time. But I'd say the team was very solid, very collaborative, because, see, we do risk management, we do virology, we do physics and science, we do all the above. And so for us, this is like, we know how to do this because we do this all the time. We just never thought about applying it to this situation and our lives and what's going on here. But it turns out the background and the talent pool we have every day here was really helpful.
So talk about what you call the warrior code when you as you have your team assembled.
Yeah, it's interesting because this idea of fearlessness and honor is the ability to say something you think needs to be said or do something you think needs to be done, but to own it and talk about it and not run away from it. So it's not like a lot of companies are chock full of politics, but what we're trying to do is to have people feel comfortable with the idea that they have thoughts and their thoughts are important. We may not agree with all their thoughts or we may not do everything they want, but we're not going to tell them don't have a thought. And that discipline of creating the space where people can do that is what we do. But out of that comes this code of conduct. So I tell people, I said, like we sent, long story, but we sent one of our senior women scientists to work with a group in Korea because we licensed a technology we created in Hawaii and they want to scale up manufacturing. We'll do that. But I said, you're there as a senior scientist and you focus on doing your job, but you're not paid to be abused by a male-dominated culture that disparages women and that kind of crap. Because I said, we don't do that and you don't do that. So I don't care what, I'm telling you ahead of time, because these guys have a bit of a reputation. That's not your job. And if they can't manage that, that's their problem and you come back. So I said, that's how we roll. And you're empowered to make that choice. But it was kind of giving them a heads up because that's a tough place to work because you've got major male domination. Here's a brilliant female scientist who's going to teach them how to do something they don't know how to do. In a process we built in the basement to scale up a manufacturability of a product for the beauty space. Now, they're experts in beauty products, but they don't know how to do this kind of technology. We did all the work here. But, I'm telling them, and the work was non-trivial. Like, it's really impressive work. But the idea of standing behind it, defending it, and so we just had a call this morning with a group in the federal government that's trying to look at biomanufacturing around the country to bring back supply chains on American soil. We've got a bunch of really cool stuff. And so one of the things that came up, which sounds kind of wacky, but it's kind of a fun project. So we found a way to produce a fabric from chicken feathers. Turns out that chicken feathers, there's about 4 billion pounds in the U.S. every year that's mostly waste. Goes into landfill. And we can produce these really cool fabrics that are stronger than nylon. And you can make it like a wool, you can make it like all kinds of stuff. So we're looking at possibly making, there's a French fashion company that contacted us, of all things. And there's a few other companies that are interested in these. It's a brand new fabric that doesn't exist, and there's nothing like it in the world. And yet, we've already started producing it. Now the question is scale. And so I'm talking to this group about setting up manufacturing in the U.S., and I said, well, think about it like this. If you got a chicken factory, you can make the material, because all you need is chicken feathers, and there's a lot of them. And so I said, we just put out the map of Tyson Foods, and they do chickens. Right next door, you could put these.
Well, why Arkansas? We could do it here. We have plain chickens in Hawaii.
We got lots of chickens in Hawaii. But see, it's a whole new material. Yeah. It's a fabric. It's got all kinds of cool applications, all created here. And people are just kind of in shock, like, what? You're doing what? And we have the data. We have the process. We actually produce it. So it's not that it can't be done. We're already doing it. We have really good data and really awesome performance. And so now we're looking at where's the right market, the right focus. And this group wanted to talk because they're trying to look at rebuilding manufacturing in the U.S. as you've got all these other markets around the world taking all the manufacturing jobs. This would be heavily dependent on robotics and that kind of thing. But, when it comes to chickens, there's chickens everywhere. And so wherever you've got abundant chickens, you could produce a fabric, and it also produces a resilient supply chain. Because right now, if you're trying to bring in cotton from other parts of the world and other things, you can set up a little facility in a location and start producing material. So I said, well, if you got 4 billion pounds of chicken feathers, you might be able to produce 1 billion sweaters a year. And so there's a group in the government. I said, well, why don't you guys buy socks? It's all right there. And we know how to build. We started a program at Oceanit a few years back on functional fabrics. Nano-impregnated materials for all kinds of functionalities. So everything from producing electricity to battery separators for lithium-ion batteries to take high temperature and high pressures, hydrogen fuel cell separators and all kinds of stuff. We did all that in the basement. And we're now able to produce these fabrics in bolts 36 inches wide. So this was one of these things we started a few years back, which was an internal innovation project, but it's stuff that's too risky for anybody to think about, so we just do it. And then it's led to tons of projects, because here we have a capability we invented in Hawaii, which has no manufacturing capability like this, but we did it anyway. And it's got all kinds of possibilities. In this case, though, it's something silly as chicken feathers, but it's an abundant waste material that is produced every year in huge amounts.
Right. So you turn a problem into, not necessarily a problem, but
right,
waste into something useful.
Something useful, and it turns out that we'll be meeting with these fashion companies because I never thought that high fashion would be interested in this kind of stuff, but apparently it's not just the design, it's also the material, the story behind it. And we have all kinds of ways to make some of it really soft and thin, some of it could be thick. There's all kinds of ways to do it.
Okay.
It's kind of a fun program.
Okay, so getting back to Warrior Code.
Yes.
So is that one of those things you just say, okay, well, chicken fairs, it sounds silly, but you
Well,
just
having
forward your head?
somebody who can be fearless with an idea to actually drive it and produce real results, and then put those results in a form to share with people to say this is a real thing. That's what it takes. It's a discipline, it's a fearlessness, it's a focus. There's a certain amount of courage because, people will say, what? Chicken feathers? But the courage to try something different, the drive and focus to deliver on it, and of course the intellect to understand how to do it, how to measure it, how to talk about it. That's what we're talking about. And that's just one little project, but it's kind of fun because I said, I didn't realize there's so much chicken feathers going on in just the U.S. alone.
Yeah, back.
Well, you don't have to go very far. You go to Whole Foods, go to any parking lot, and you've got chickens.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, it's like, well, you could actually start producing some useful things from what otherwise is what is considered a waste product.
Yeah,
It's just
so-
kind of thrown away.
Yeah, it's not worthless.
Right.
Yeah.
And we call the new fabric keratin, or Kertex, made of keratin, but it's Kertex is the fabric.
Okay, so that's what's possible.
Right. But back to the warrior code, Bushido, it's people that are willing to try something that's hard. It's a little scary. They risk being ridiculed. They risk losing. They risk a lot of things. But if they have a discipline in the way they execute and the way they work, there's a lot you can do. Sometimes you try something and you lose. You get up off the ground and you go back in. So the lunch discussion today was with this young group of PhDs was if you don't get hammered occasionally, you're not doing it. You got to do things that are on the edge and you're going to wipe out. And the trick is where you get back up. But as I told him, going back to the surfing metaphor, I said, if you're not going to paddle in, you're never catching the wave. But if you wipe out, that happens sometimes. That comes with getting the ride of your life.
So the next time I see you, all your employees going to be wearing chicken shirts with the Oceanit logo.
Well, it comes out looking just like regular fabric. That's the thing that's crazy. And I'll show you later on, but it's impressive. It's a cool idea, and it's a category now in and of itself. And so just when you think there's nothing to do, there's lots to do. But the kind of drive it takes to produce it, get there and demonstrate it, that's hard. And those are the Techno Warriors, guys or girls, but learning how to do things that are hard. And there's a fine line between resolve and fearlessness and craziness. So we're not encouraging people to be crazy. Crazy by definition is, I think Einstein said it, you keep trying the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, but the results are the same. When the results are the same, it's time to move on. But if you're learning, that's different.
Yeah, so but whether it's the military or high fashion,
Right.
there are applications you can
Absolutely.
use with these products.
Exactly. And so we'll be leaning heavily on the commercial side, not the military side. They'll invest in research. They're not very good at acquiring new technology, in spite of what people may think, because you have these embedded processes that make it very hard for them to do new things. But they do invest significant capital into ideas, sometimes crazy ideas for all kinds of reasons. And so we're happy with that. We don't expect them to buy everything that we work on, not even close. But what we do is we'll pivot to healthcare, commercial space, energy, all kinds of other, because they'll take a lot of that risk. And we're doing things that are risky. A lot of the time, never been done.
Well, I look forward to seeing one of your shirts.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think of a couple of the Hawaii designers that might be kind of fun to work with. So producing some materials and see what they come up with on different kinds of, like a new Aloha shirt.
Right. Oh,
And
yeah, that's a great idea.
Sig Zane on Hilo, I haven't talked to him. That's his board there. That's his
Right.
design. But I thought that would be interesting, a new fabric and used in a new way, developed in Hawaii.
Right, right. High-tech aloha.
Right. I like that.